All right, everyone, it's time for some history on Sudan. I mean, usually when people ask me if to tell them about what's going on in Sudan, I'll say, "Do you want me to start in 2023 or do you want me to start in 1955?" Most people say 23, but we're diving in. We're starting at 1955 today. And I'll admit, I'm not from Sudan. I don't really know anybody from Sudan, actually. I've just been trying to read and learn more about this place where there's a lot of suffering happening and tried to come at it from a perspective of like trying to understand always political economy. So from what I understand, in 55 they got independence from Britain and Egypt and began the Republic of Sudan. Kind of imperfect, but they're like electoral democracy of a sort that there were problems, I think, of power sharing with those in the south of the country, which is now South Sudan. Um, those problems were exacerbated in 58 when the CIA did a coup and installed a guy called Ibrahim Aboud. Um, he met with Kennedy in 61. He exacerbated the war in the South and continued into what was the first civil war in Sudan and basically fought in the South from 1955 until 1972. And throughout that, so Ibrahim Aboud was in power until 1964. Then, after that, there was a transition back to something more like a democracy in the Republic of Sudan. And after that, um, there was once again a coup in 1969, I think, the same year that just neighboring to the northwest, Muammar Gaddafi did a coup, and a dude in Sudan named Jafar Nimeri did a coup, and he began his own version of basically social democratism. A kind of like, okay, let's expand the social welfare state, but persecute the hell out of our communist party. In fact, there were members of the Sudanese Communist Party who were in Libya. In 1971, Muammar Gaddafi collaborated with the Nimeri regime to send them back to Sudan, where they were either tortured or executed. I can't remember which. Oh, they were executed. I remember. They were. I think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they were tortured too. So that was Gaddafi's collaborationism with the anti-communism of Nimeri. But in 1972, the civil war had ended, and I know less about that and less about. I know as well that there had been in South Sudan, and there had been like throughout the civil war, civilian areas like in Juba were targeted, and in Val. Uh, I don't know how to pronounce the name of that place. Wow, something like that. My knowledge of like all of the languages of that region of is limited to I is very bad. I don't know Dinka. I don't know Nuer. I don't speak any languages of South Sudan. My Arabic isn't even that great. But anyway, like coming back to this, in where were we now? Yeah, so that was the end of that civil war. Um, Nimeri ruled until about like 84, I want to say. Yeah, I think 1984 is when he ruled until. And after that, there was a transition sort of back to, again, some kind of like democracy type thing. But there was the reignition of war that happened at some point again in the South. And I want to just look up the dates on that just to be sure. No, not this one. Second Sudanese. Yeah, so in '83, actually, is when the second civil war started again, and it was again like a terrible time. Wikipedia here just says civilian death toll is one of the highest of any since World War II, and it was marked by numerous human rights violations, including slavery and mass killings. So what had been happening in South Sudan from in that civil war was a very bad time, and I did know about in particular how horrible and how bad of a time it was because the Civil War started again in 1983. Now I've read the dates again, and I'm remembering what I read and the impression that it left. But basically, is that in 1989, in '84, after Nimeri's rule was done, um, The civil war was continuing, and then in '89, Omar al-Bashir came to power, and this guy. This guy was terrible. I mean, well, okay. We also, now that we're in the '80s, we need to talk about Muammar Gaddafi, who in 1972 he created this thing called the Islamic Legion. He also created Tajammu al Arabi. These were supposed to be pan-Arabist organizations to be operating in the south of Libya. They're basically the goal. At the time, Muammar Gaddafi would refer to the Tubu, um, and as well as the Zaghawa and other peoples who live in the south, of the coast of Libya. Refer to all these people with a derogatory word. He would call them Zurqa, and he would talk about how these places needed to be Arabized. He was very anti-black until the 1980s, and it really showed in the way that he was, ethnically cleansing the Tubu people starting in 1970 from Fezzan region and all throughout Libya. And then it got from there basically to in Sudan. He created Tajammu al Arabi, which was an openly racist organization that stressed the Arab character of the Darfur province. Darfur literally means region of the Fur, as in the Fur people, right? There are three main in Darfur. There are three main settled agricultural communities historically: Masalit, Zaghawa, and Fur people, and the Bajara are like Arab nomads basically, and what happened was there was a Tajammu al Arabi, which was that militia, and then the Islamic Legion. They had been sort of kicked out of Chad because they were sent to Chad as a part of Muammar Gaddafi's claim to control the Awuzu Strip in Chad. It was part of that whole thing, and all of that. Basically, these these people, there was Zaghawa and Tebu people who were displaced and came into neighboring Sudan, and they'd been displaced by this fighting in the Awuzu Strip. They had been militarized enough, perceived as Arabs by the real African tribes in Darfur, and then integrated themselves into Tajammu al Arabi. Some of them did. I'm not like all of them, obviously. Like, you should, if you think that, you're a fucking racist. You should understand like what I'm saying, right? And trace the sort of story. I'm tracing the story of how a war in one place led to refugees fleeing, some of whom had weapons and were hungry, and saw basically a way to incorporating with this Tajammu al Arabi, and them both being kind of Gaddafi formed pan-Arabist organizations. Then came into 1980s when they were doing a massacre of Fur people in Darfur, beginning the genocide pattern in that region, which would get like much more horrible later. Much more horrible than like mass killings of Fur people. Much more horrible than that, because it was even more mass killings and rapes. Sometimes, sometimes of children as young as 2 years old. It was one of the worst genocides, I think. Full stop. And also one of the worst because it was so ignored. And anyway, we're going to get to how we got there, right? Where basically this Tajammu al Arabi eventually turned themselves into Janjaweed. And in 2003, so Omar al-Bashir comes to power. The war gets a lot more brutal in the south, and that's where we start to also see this slavery and mass killings, and basically like one of the worst wars since World War II in terms of the loss of human life. Yeah, this is some fucking horrible, sad shit, isn't it? This is really fucking sad shit. We're gonna keep going though, because we need to talk about it, because believe it or not, it gets worse. This is one of like the most historically, like, I mean, in terms of just like the scale and the intensity and the length of conflict and war, just straight up war happening in Sudan. It's like this is Afghanistan levels of trauma. This is Afghanistan levels of like I mean of pain and loss and devastation. This is Palestine levels. Like um, you know, like and with all of these are different types of destructions of society, destructions of people through the worst means possible. Afghanistan, Palestine, and Sudan. It's different, of course, and you have to look at like the different ways in which the different forces, are like killing these people. Um, in Palestine, it's settler colonialism from Israel. And now that's gone. Now that's an active, ongoing genocide at the moment that Israel is doing. um, there are lots of active genocides ongoing right now, and I was talking about the one that's happening in Darfur right now and how we got here. Right, Omar al-Bashir is it was a total piece of shit. Ruled until 2019. The war was in the south was brutal. Ended in like basically creation of an independent country in 2011, and there was still struggle between local power groups, and the war still raged on, and there was still slavery, human trafficking. There was still like all kinds of really horrible, fucked up things happening all throughout South Sudan to people, even after 2011, after the creation of the independent state. But let's talk about Darfur. 2003 genocide there happened against the Zaghawa and Masalit people, and it was really bad. I mean, this was like maybe one of the worst genocides I've read about. And like, well, I mean, actually, if you read about any genocide, they're all bad. I don't think there is any one that's worst or, but like this one basically the Janjaweed came out of the Tajammu al-Arabi, like I said. Omar al-Bashir also covertly funded these people. There was lot of mass murder, a lot of rape, a lot of sexual slavery. A terrible, 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 terrible time in Darfur from 2003 until 2010. This pattern basically continued again in 2014, 15. Again, this happened. Janjaweed then turned into rapid support forces, basically. And when I say turned into, in terms of the Jammu al-Arabi became Janjaweed, I mean their leadership integrated into this new group. Same thing happened here. That's what I mean to say, basically. That's what you should understand. Now, this is fucking horrible. I don't know what else to say. It's, in 2019, finally, Omar al-Bashir was gotten rid of in protests. There's apparent power sharing between the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces were demanding more and more of a cut of power sharing. In 2021, they canceled any attempt at like having citizen representation in the elections, I think, or something. I have to check again exactly what happened in 2021. Is it in here? Yeah, it is. Okay. 1958. Yeah. Oh, right. So yes, in 2021, there was a coup by Burhan, the RSF guy, and in 2023, RSF began to basically fight a war against the Sudanese Armed Forces. RSF was backed and is still backed by Russia and the United Arab Emirates, um, and basically these countries have created a proxy war in Sudan since 2023. RSF forces are just trying to gain control of territory Presumably, I think it's probably for Wagner Group to be able to control and exploit resources in Sudan in the same way that Wagner gets to profit 25% off of all of the regime-controlled oil in Syria. In the same way, I think this is how Russian imperialism is proceeding in Sudan at the moment, by trying to control territory, and then be able to extract it. And the way they control that territory is by inflicting a regime of terror on the population, and this means human trafficking, mass rape, everywhere they go, particularly in Darfur. In 2023, they also killed 15,000 Masalit boys, summarily executed them, I think, and there still is ongoing, like, really, really horrible genocide once again, mass murder and rape by RSF, once again, against Zaghawa and Masalit people in Darfur. It's a terrible time. It's a really terrible time. RSF had controlled a lot of territory. I'll show you this map here. You can see this was the map as of like late 2023, and you can see in Khartoum, the capital, there had been a lot of battles going on for a while. RSF had been controlling most of Khartoum until recently, so across from Khartoum, across the Nile, there's a city, Durman, where a lot of like radio communication stuff is, and recently that place was liberated from RSF by the Sudanese Armed Forces. And like all I'm giving you here right now is kind of basic history. I lack a very thorough understanding of the political economy of Sudan, which I set out saying we're going to talk about the political economy of Sudan, and I'm going to explain where all the suffering is coming from. I mean, you can see the sort of the politics. You can see roughly like who's in charge and who's doing what, and I told you about like various coups, and I mean, I can tell you about the political economy of Numeri based on a guess, what I had there, and I can tell you about the political economy of Omar al-Bashir. Also was very, it was like going in a very like right-wing capitalist direction, very much in the vein of like basic shit for people not being provided. It is being provided to a bourgeois class, who also happens to own like, you know, means of like distributing all the food and stuff like that, ultimately, in some ways. And yeah, like that, I mean, and that's like fucking same story as everywhere, right? But in 2011, 2022, there were protests against like rising inflation, so that's where I'm getting that from. And in general, what seems to be the sort of de facto structure of Omar al-Bashir's regime was that there was like a bourgeois that had its connection probably to the regime, and they were on the top. There are common Sudanese Arabs here in the middle, and then on the bottom were people in regions that were facing bombardments and genocide, like Darfur and South Sudan. And so that kind of is roughly the political economy here. I don't know much about the political economy of Ibrahim Aboud, you know, so that's like all very important stuff to really understand fully how it is we got here, and also to understand fully the dimensions of war in South Sudan, which I don't yet fully. That's all. 18 minutes about Sudan. Okay, not bad, but that's all basic history, and a little bit of political economy at the end, but also peppered throughout. But I really made sure to tie it all together at the end. I thought that was important.